Well, hello and welcome back to Overnight Accountants course on employee versus independent contractor. Now, right now, I believe we're in lesson 3, and in this lesson, we're going to be discussing the common law employee test that the IRS uses to determine whether an individual, a worker, mind you, is an employee or an independent contractor. It all boils down to the common law test, and as we discussed earlier, it's very subjective, it's very gray, it is very hard to make a definite determination, but we're going to cover it in this lesson. Okay, there are basically 3 common law tests. And the factors that go into making this determination really spring from these 3 common law tests. And there are 3 broad categories. And those are how much control the individual has or the employer has over the employee or the independent contractor. One of these tests is behavioral control. How much behavioral control does the business have over the individual? How much financial control do they have over the individual? And really, when you get down to it, what is really honestly the nature of the relationship between the parties? So these are really, everything surrounded around these 3 common law tests. Basically, how much behavioral control do you have over them? How much financial control? And then finally, is this really a business contract relationship or a business to business relationship? Or is this relationship more like a employer-employee relationship? So let's continue. Now, a lot of these factors, or a lot of these, the common law tests, when the IRS uses them, they really use 20 factors or 20 common law factors to provide guidance both for the IRS in making determination, but also for you as the employer or for your clients who are in the situation trying to determine whether someone is a worker or an independent contractor. These are found in Revenue Ruling 8741, so they go back to 1987. It's a 41 revenue ruling during that year. And you're going to find a copy of it in your resource section, so if you want to pause this and grab that, feel free. You're going to see that we're going to cover the vast majority of those in this lesson. Now, I've got to keep you in mind here, let you know that the gig economy is changing everything here, and really there's many state courts do not always use these, and it's becoming more and more common with the states. The IRS may still use these common law factors or the 20 factors of common law test. However, many of the states have abandoned them for other tests, mind you. Now, some are applying, this goes back pretty far, but some are applying the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, or ERISA. They're utilizing precedents in there, and we're going to go over one of the most common precedents here in a moment. Some states are using case law precedents, and in some states, even now, you'll see contemporaneously that some states are using even different tests, and many are resorting to what's called an ABC test, which we're going to discuss in a later lesson. That's really a 3-pronged test to see if a worker is an employee or really an independent contractor. And you're going to find it like with Uber. You probably heard a lot of stuff about the Uber ride-sharing program or the ride-sharing business. That's how you say. Many states like California, I believe Pennsylvania, and New York so far have applied these ABC tests or some variation of it, making these individuals employees. And why that's scary, as if you're a professional taking this course or a paraprofessional, or if you're an employer taking this course, this can be very scary because, hey, if the state makes them employee, they're going to be employees for everything. So we're going over the IRS rules in this course. Now, let's go over the ERISA Supreme Court factor. This is Supreme Court rulings. This is really, really kind of a watershed moment in the common law test, and this is really based on the Darden factors, which many states are now utilizing. This goes from 1992 and Nationwide Mutual Insurance Company versus a fellow named Robert Darden, I believe his name is. Let's go over some of the facts in this case just to make you understand what we're dealing with and why this is kind of creeping in to the state issues and not just an IRS issue anymore. See, Robert Darden was treated as an independent contractor. He was basically an agent for Nationwide. He had an agency for Nationwide. According to his contract, they would enroll him in the Nationwide retirement plan. However, if his job terminated at any point, he was not able to compete within 25 miles of the location he was at before. And if he did, he would end up losing his retirement or his participation in the retirement. So what happened in reality is his job got terminated or he quit. I'm not really sure which happened. I don't know if he got fired or he quit, but either way, he broke the contract because he went to work for the competition within that 25-mile radius. And of course, Nationwide, what they do, they revoked his retirement. Darden sued, and he sued under the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, ERISA. And the court found in this act that he was really an employee for purposes of those benefits. So what you're going to find in many of these situations is, with the states primarily, you're going to find that someone's an employee for a certain benefit or a certain employee right. They may not rise to the level, however, of being an employee under the common law factors utilized by the IRS. When you get in that gray area, that's kind of a mess. What do you do? Because if you're treated as an employee for one thing, it's kind of a slippery slope. You're treated as an employee for everything at the state level, and then of course they're treated as employees all around. The issue is the class of group of workers, and the retroactive reclassification, which we'll discuss in later lessons. All right, so what's the purpose of the common law test? Well, the purpose of the common law test is really, obviously, for the IRS, they use them to determine whether someone's an employee or a contractor. And it all boils down to this. You want to measure the independence of the individual or the worker versus the dependence of the worker or the individual. Think about it. Independent contractors are in business for themselves by definition. They're independent, whereas an employee is not independent. They are dependent on the employer or the business paying them basically in many different ways. So independence, independent contractor, non-independent, employee. It's kind of what all these factors boil down to. And many years, employers have tried to get around them in different ways, and you still can. We're going to discuss that in this course. However, you want the relationship to be as real as possible with that business. Basically, the independent contractor is in business. So let's go through the factors here, or the three common law tests. First one's going to be behavioral control. And what behavioral really means is how much control do you have over the individual, their behavior, how they act. And we're going to go over quite a few bullet points on that here in this section of this lesson. But it's really, if it boils down to, the more control you have over the individual or the worker, the more likely they're going to be an employee. Okay? The less control you have over the individual, over their behavior, the more likely they're going to be self-employed, meaning the more likely they're going to be an independent contractor. So, and employers, they have the right or ability to control when, where, and how the worker does the job for them, does a job for which they're hired. So it all boils down to whether you can control when, where, and how the worker gets the work done. The more control you have, it's not cut and dry like anything in these tests. However, the more control, the more likely the worker is to be an employee. Now, those hiring contractors, if you're hiring contractors, you don't have all this control. You may have a little control in one area. You may have some control in more than one of these areas. However, overall, you don't have control. And that's why it's so great, because there's a big line here between these two, being an employee and an independent contractor. All right, so we talk about behavioral control. We discussed the right or authority. Basically, the right is the authority to direct a behavior, and the ability means it has both the means to direct the behavior. So you have the authority and you have the means to control that behavior. The authority, in other words, let me just say here, in other words, you have the authority and the tools of when, where, and how the worker does the work. Let's go through a few examples here. Now, these are actually largely from the 20-factor tests, the 20 common factors, I guess I should say, from the IRS, because we're determining the amount of behavioral control. So, does the owner direct the schedule of the worker or the number of hours? If the answer is yes, more likely to be an employee. If the answer is no, more likely to be independent. Does the owner direct where the work is done? Where are you going to show up to work that day? Do you have an office where they go to every day? If you're directing where the work is completed, and the answer to that question is yes, you are, more likely they're an employee. If the answer is no, check or mark the independent contractor. Does the owner direct how the work is to be done? Not just the results. Do you direct the methodology, the steps and procedures, the systems that are utilized for the worker to do the work? If the answer to that's yes, more likely employee. The answer is no, more likely independent contractor. You see here, there's a Y and an E on many of these, a Y and an E or an N and an I on many of these to help you understand what the answer means. Okay, does the business provide supplies and tools? Independent contractors generally bring their own supplies and tools, whereas employees are going to rely on you to do it. That's behavioral control. What about does the business train the worker? If your business trains a worker, if you have a client whose business is training that worker on how they want things done, more likely it's going to be an employee. If you're not doing that, independent contractor, you're hiring them to get the job done, and they already know how to do it. So if you're training the worker to do the job, the level of that training, the more training you provide to that worker, the more likely they're going to be an employee. Is the worker allowed to compete against the business? Are they really in business for themselves? Are they allowed to go out and compete against you for the same type of customer? If they are, that's great. Are they able to work for a competition? If they're able to work for the competition and you to that particular job, more likely they're going to be an independent contractor. Finally, maybe not finally, but does the business control the appearance of the worker? Do they control the uniform? Are they required to wear a uniform? Do they drive around a vehicle that's got your logo on it? If yes, you're looking towards an employee. Do they dress or act a certain way? Do you have them answer the phone a certain way? Do you have them act in a certain way because they are representing your business, not necessarily as an agent, but well, like an employee agent. The employee's an agent of your business. The more they're doing that, the more likely they are to be employees as opposed to independent contractors. All right, so that's behavioral control. Let's move on to financial control. Remember things about the amount of control you have over the employee, or the worker, I should say. I apologize. The more control you have, as in the behavioral test, the more likely the individual is an employee. The less control you have, the more likely they're self-employed. Kind of makes sense. So let's go through some of the 20-factor questions here that we're going to look at to determine if they are an employee or an independent contractor. Does the worker risk financial loss? Business owners, being an entrepreneur, that's risk. So the more risk the worker has to have financial loss, to have a loss from that job because they have their own expenses, the more likely they are to pay an independent contractor. Does the worker have insurance? Businesses have insurance because if they mess up a job, they could be liable for damages to you and other employers, for lack of a better word, for other businesses that are hiring them to provide their services. So do they have insurance? Businesses do. Employees generally don't, unless you're paying for it. Is the worker reimbursed for expenses? If you reimburse the worker for expenses, the more likely they are to be employed. Remember, all this is not cut and dry. It's a continuum. Does the worker pay for the materials? Workers often will pay for their own materials in order to do the job, and then they'll bill you for them or will be incorporated into the bill they provide to you. So the more likely you are that if the worker pays for their materials, more likely they're an independent contractor. So I just did that one. Does the worker have overhead? A business has overhead costs. They have costs that they have to pay to keep their business operational. If they have overhead costs, more likely they're an independent contractor. If they're completely dependent on you for their paychecks, if you're calling it a paycheck, they're probably an employee. But businesses have their own costs separate and apart from the specific work they do for you. Does a worker seek and have other customers? Businesses work for many, many individuals. If you're their only customer, it kind of leans toward, it doesn't kind of look like they're an employee and not necessarily an independent contractor. Here's kind of a big one too. How do you pay the worker? Is the worker paid by the job or by the hour? Do they give you an invoice or not? If the worker's paid by the job, they're more likely to be an independent contractor. If they turn in a timesheet to you in some manner and you pay them from that timesheet, specifically if you pay them with other employees at the same time, there's a good chance that individual's going to be found to be an employee. Does the worker send you an invoice on a regular basis? Say, is it monthly? Or do they turn in a timesheet? Kind of from the previous test. Businesses send you an invoice. They don't send you a timesheet. Employees do. When does the worker bill? When does the worker bill you? If it's not the same time as you're paying your employees, if you have other employees, or if it's like every other week or every week on Friday, you get a timesheet from them and you're treating them like an independent contractor, there's a good chance they're going to be treated as employees. How dependent on is the worker for their livelihood? If you're their only customer and they're dependent on you for their livelihood to pay their bills and pay their mortgage, that's a good bit of financial control you have over them. The more likely that worker is going to be considered an employee. Okay, so that was financial control. Now let's look at the nature of the relationship. And you're going to see a lot of this stuff in here is really, there's a lot of common sense. However, it's been litigated to high heaven and it's going to continue to be so, and that Tax Cut and Job Act is only going to make it worse. So let's dig into the third test, the third common law test, and that's the nature of the relationship. Now what we really think of this is this really is a smell test. Like I said, it's common sense. Does it walk like a duck? Talk like a duck? If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, I should say, it's probably a duck. So this is really like the common law. What is the true nature of the relationship? Is this a business-customer relationship, or is this an employee-employer relationship? That's what we need to answer. We need to determine, is the worker really in business for themselves, or are they an employee that is dependent on that business? Independent contractors have written contracts for the most part. Do you have a written contract with your workers because they're really in business for themselves? Employees receive benefits. Now, if you have any independent contractors receiving any form of benefits that an employee might receive, that's a big no-no. That would be a big Y on the employee issue. There's a good chance those individuals will be found to be employees. And that's any benefits. That's a slippery slope. Vacation time, holiday pay, anything like that. Health insurance. You offer any of those to an independent contractor, good luck. Okay. Independent contractors, they understand and plan for the tax consequences of being in business because they are going to most of them will complete a Schedule C. Now, if they're incorporated or something like that, maybe I should add that to the list. If you're paying a corporation, they have their incorporation, that goes a long way. And there's some entities that are making their contractors form corporations for that purpose. Not necessarily it's going to fly every time, particularly if they don't pass the other tests, if they're forcing them to create corporations or S corporations, or even LLCs to do that separation, even though they're treated as an employee. That won't fly, but if they have other customers and they're incorporated, that really goes a long way to showing that they are an independent contractor, not an employee. But independent contractors, I said, they understand and plan for the tax consequences of the relationship. Independent contractors have business accessories. Employees oftentimes will. They're going to have a business license. They may pay workers' comp, or they have opted out of workers' comp on themselves because they're business license and the state is requiring them to do so. They have a website. They have business cards. They have all these other things that are associated with, you would say, an individual's in business for themselves. If you have somebody like that, collect those things. Make sure you have copies of them. Put them in a file. It might protect you one day. Independent contractors charge sales tax. So if you have independent contractors or workers that are providing services for you and you're paying them as independent contractors, if you know the nature of the work they're doing for you is subject to sales tax, and that's going to depend on the state and the municipality, they should be charging that sales tax. If they're not, that would lend towards the employee side of the tipping scale. So make sure they're charging you that. It may cost you a little extra, but they should be charging it to you. If not, there's a situation where the state maybe will come back to you and get that sales tax because you didn't pay it either. They'll get you for use tax. Separate topic. Okay, employees are engaged permanently. I mean, it's their continuous basis. They're showing up day after day, week after week, whereas independent contractors are really just hired when you need them to perform a particular task or a particular job. Independent contractors may also have employees. If they're truly in business for themselves and they're trying to grow their business, that's not necessary, but if they have employees, you just knocked it out of the park pretty much. Well, unless you set it up like that to claim that they're an independent contractor. And businesses have tried to do that too. Okay, let's see here. How closely is the job related to the payer's core business? Now, this is something the states are looking at big time with that ABC test. How closely is the job related to the payer's or the business's core business? So, for example, if you have a fencing company, is the worker installing fence? If you have a law firm, is the attorney working within the field of your competency? So that's it for the behavioral control test. Additional resources are going to be available on our website there or on in the course resources. We got some 20-factor tests. We also got publication 15A. And we also have Department of Labor fact sheet number 13 and also some court cases for you. So thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next section.